random viewers, and welcome to another episode of my Space Engineers Novana System Survival. This is a mod pack that adds 10 different planets, and our goal is to explore all of them at some point in this series. Last episode we built a mobile base, which you can see behind this plane that we're building, and we then moved that away from the crash site. That was not recorded. I'm not sure why, but anyways, it's here now. The crash site is just on the other side of this hill. Anyways, we're building this plane so that we can find a location for our permanent base and move there. We're now adding the lifting engines to this aircraft. It'll, when it's done, have many different engines, and it makes it very sprightly. You'll see that when it begins flying after everything has been set up. After the aircraft was in a complete enough state to fly, we got it to hover just above the ground so that we could test everything and make sure it wouldn't spontaneously explode or anything like that. We did conclude that it would not explode. However, it did have a similar glitch to what I had a very long time ago, where the roll doesn't work quite well when you're stationary. But once you're moving, it's fixed, and once we had it flying, we docked it to the top of the rover. Once docked, we could give it some finishing touches, such as adding landing gear. While the batteries on the plane were busy charging, we began building a kind of bumper on the front of the mobile base. The idea of this was so that we wouldn't have to waste a ton of time cutting down every tree on our path. We would be driving quite a long distance if we could make any estimates at this time. So we made this bar so that we could run into trees and knock them right over. We later found that we could swerve around them, but it was very useful to have this bar if the trees were too tightly packed. And the idea was that the bar would take damage and the rover would not. We put heavy armor on the front of the bar, hoping that that would work, and we added other members to keep everything else safe. Once the batteries were finally charged on the plane, we took off and began exploring. We started by going straight up and just looking around and seeing what we could find. We eventually picked to go straight ahead towards those mountains you can see right there. After a few minutes of flying had passed, we found this really nice hill here on the other side of the mountain that had everything we were looking for a base, a great place for a launch pad, and then just a great view to look at. So we decided we would bring the rover here. It was going to be over a 7-kilometer drive. Once we made it back, it was my job to cut out the wheel chocks that were holding the mobile base in place, and it began to roll forward on the beginning of its very long journey. Our first strategy of making it 7.9 kilometers or so was for my friend to drive and me to run ahead and cut down trees. This didn't work super well because it was so time consuming, so we decided to put our bar to the test. I purposely left a tree in the way and instructed the driver to run it straight through and see what kind of damage it would do to the bar. As you can see, it hit pretty nicely. The tree did fall back on the rover, but it didn't do any damage up there too much, besides knocking the plane off its docking port, but that was fine. We just locked it down. But it did leave a much bigger dent than we originally thought it would, and that took some fixing to get correct again. And we concluded that we would have to be much more careful about running over trees. Our next strategy was for me just to run around on top of the bar and repair it as damage accumulated. This worked very well. It was much faster and much more entertaining. Every time we would hit a tree, I would run over to the affected area and weld it right up. The little things on the bottom did get damaged, however, those could be replaced at a later time. This system worked very well and got us a very long distance in a very short amount of time. When there was only around 2 kilometers left, we switched places and I drove so that my friend could experience the joy of running around in the bar and fixing things. I had to maneuver through these trees, and it got pretty tight. However, due to some modifications of adding a gyroscope and some boosting engines, we were able to maneuver. Those engines came in very handy at these very steep slopes. We were able to fire them and they could push us up the hill. Finally, the hill we had selected for our base came into view, and it wasn't a whole lot further to go. Once we made it there, we began driving up the hill and finding a good spot for it to be parked, and I held it still using the motors while my friend added wheel chocks. This right here was the first block of our base being put down, and from there we slowly built a platform, and that was about all we accomplished that night. We had gotten a lot done, and we decided to call it there, and that's where I'm going to call the episode. So thank you so much for watching, thank you for your support, please do like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you next episode, and I hope you all have a very nice day.